Claire smiled as if she were doing me a favor when she pressed a white takeout box into my hands. Around us, crystal glasses chimed, and guests admired plates dressed in rosemary butter and filet mignon. But for me, my daughter-in-law had saved scraped leftovers from the kitchen. Not one person at the family table moved, not even my son. I stood there in my navy silk dress, holding a box of cold food like I was some unwanted extra at my own family's celebration. Then the chef stepped out from the kitchen, looked straight at me and said very gently, "Mrs. Whitmore, you should not be eating that. If this opening stirred something in you, stay with me. And while you do tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are, I always love knowing who's here with me. And please, if you've ever been made to feel small by someone who should have honored you, leave me a comment. I read them more than you know." Like and subscribe if stories about dignity, heartbreak, and hard-won healing speak to your heart. I remember standing in my bedroom that afternoon, staring at 3 different dresses laid carefully across my bed like they were choices for 3 different versions of myself. The navy silk one meant dignity. The soft gray cardigan dress meant comfort. The floral one, well, that one felt like I was trying too hard to belong somewhere I no longer fit. In the end, I chose the navy. I told myself it wasn't about impressing anyone. At 62, I should have been past that. But the truth is, when your own family starts looking at you like you're optional, you begin to wonder if maybe you've become invisible without realizing it. I stood in front of the mirror longer than I needed to, adjusting the neckline, smoothing out a wrinkle that wasn't really there. My hands lingered at my collarbone, where I almost reached for the pearl necklace my late husband had given me on our 25th anniversary. I didn't wear it. Some things feel too heavy when the room you're walking into isn't safe enough to hold them. Instead, I picked up the small velvet box sitting on my dresser. Inside was a gold bracelet, delicate but strong. It had belonged to my mother, and before her, my grandmother. I had kept it all these years, waiting for the right moment to pass it down. Tonight, I told myself, might finally be that moment. Not for Claire, for Sophie. That little girl still ran into my arms like I was the safest place in her world. And in a house where everything else felt staged and calculated, her love was the only thing that felt real. I slipped the bracelet into my purse. "Don't expect too much," I whispered to my reflection. But even as I said it, I knew I was already expecting something. Not applause, not even gratitude, just a seat at the table. That shouldn't have been too much to ask. The drive to the country club took about 30 minutes, though it felt longer. The closer I got, the more my chest tightened, not with excitement, but with something quieter and harder to name. A kind of warning. I had been to that club only once before for a charity luncheon Claire had hosted last spring. Everything about it had been pristine, the kind of place where even the silence felt expensive. People didn't laugh too loud there. They didn't speak too openly either. Claire thrived in that kind of environment. I had spent most of that luncheon nodding politely, sipping tea I didn't really want, and trying to ignore the way Claire introduced me to others. "This is Ethan's mother, Sandra," she had said. Not my mother-in-law. Not even Sandra Whitmore. Just an extension of my son. A detail. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel as I pulled into the parking lot. The sun was beginning to dip low, casting a warm, golden light across the white columns of the building. Valet attendants moved briskly, opening doors for guests dressed in elegant evening wear. Laughter floated through the airlight, effortless, practiced. I sat in the car for a moment longer than necessary. I thought about turning around. I really did. But then I pictured Sophie's face, the way her eyes lit up when she saw me, the way she always asked, "Are you staying long this time, Grandma?" So I took a breath, opened the car door, and stepped out. Inside, everything was exactly as I expected, and somehow worse. Soft lighting, polished marble floors, the faint scent of fresh flowers, and something buttery drifting from the kitchen. Servers moved like shadows, efficient and quiet, carrying trays of champagne. A young hostess at the front desk looked up at me with a professional smile. "Good evening. Are you here for the Whitmore event?" "Yes," I said, returning the smile. "And your name?" "Sandra Whitmore." She paused for just a fraction of a second. Not long enough for most people to notice. But I noticed. "Of course," she said quickly, though her tone shifted ever so slightly. "Right this way." As I followed her inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't expected me. Or worse, that she hadn't been told I mattered. The main room was already filling up. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead, casting soft reflections across the room. Round tables were set with white linens, gold accents, and neatly folded napkins that looked too perfect to touch. And there, in the center of it all, was Claire. She stood surrounded by a small group of guests, her laughter rising above the rest. Her dress was a deep emerald green fitted perfectly. Her blonde hair swept into an elegant updo. She looked flawless, untouchable. For a moment, I simply watched her, and then she saw me. There it was, that smile. Polished, controlled, just a hint too tight at the corners. "Sandra," she said, stepping forward. "Not Mom. Never that. I'm so glad you made it." The words were right. The tone wasn't. I stepped in and gave her a light hug, careful not to wrinkle her dress. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied. She pulled back quickly, her eyes already scanning the room again, as if checking who might be watching us. "Ethan's over there," she said, gesturing vaguely. "He's been swamped." Of course he had. I followed her gaze and spotted my son across the room, speaking to two men in suits. He looked confident, composed, every bit the successful attorney he had worked so hard to become. For a moment, pride swelled in my chest. I had raised that man. I had stayed up nights helping him study, worked extra hours to pay his tuition, held him together when he thought he wasn't good enough, and now watching him from across the room, I wasn't sure if he even saw me. "Go ahead," Claire added. "I'll come find you later. We're just finalizing a few things." "Of course," I said. "Always of course." I made my way toward Ethan, weaving carefully through clusters of guests. Before I could reach him, someone brushed past me, nearly knocking my purse off my shoulder. "Oh, sorry," the woman said quickly, barely looking at me. "It's all right," I replied. "It always was." When I finally reached Ethan, he glanced at me, just a flicker of recognition before his attention snapped back to the men he was speaking with. "Mom," he said, almost as an afterthought. Hey, not even a full sentence." He leaned in for a quick hug, one arm distracted. "You look nice," he added, already turning back to his conversation. I stood there for a second, waiting for something more. There wasn't anything. "Excuse me, gentlemen," he said, stepping away just long enough to lower his voice. "Mom, can we catch up later?" "Tonight's kind of a lot, yes," I said quietly. "Of course." There it was again. Always of course. I found myself drifting toward the edge of the room near a small table set slightly apart from the others. It wasn't labeled, it wasn't decorated like the rest, it just existed, like me. I set my purse down and took a slow breath, trying to steady myself. That was when I felt small arms wrap around my waist. "Grandma." I looked down to see Sophie, her dark curls bouncing as she hugged me tightly. And just like that, something inside my chest softened. "There you are," I whispered, kneeling down to her level. "I was looking for you." "I thought you weren't coming," she said, pulling back just enough to look at me. "I told you I would." "There you are," I whispered, kneeling down to her level. "I was looking for you." "I thought you weren't coming." she said, pulling back just enough to look at me. I told you I would. She studied my face for a moment, like she was checking something deeper than my words. Don't leave early tonight, she said quietly. My heart skipped. Why would I do that? She hesitated. Just for a second. I don't know, she said. Just don't, okay? I forced a smile. Okay. But as she ran off again, I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew something I didn't. And for the first time that evening, I realized I wasn't just unwelcome. I was being placed, positioned, like a piece in a game I didn't even know I was playing. I stayed where I was for a few moments after Sophie ran off my hand, still resting on the edge of that forgotten little table. The room around me buzzed with laughter and polished conversation, but it all felt strangely distant, like I was watching it through glass. Placed. That word wouldn't leave me. Not welcomed, not included. Placed. I looked around more carefully this time, not as a guest trying to belong, but as someone trying to understand the rules of a game she hadn't agreed to play. Every table had a small card with names written in elegant script. Couples sat together. Business associates were grouped with purpose. Even distant acquaintances seemed to have a seat that made sense. Except me. I walked slowly along the edge of the room, pretending to admire the floral arrangements while I searched for my name. Sandra Whitmore. It didn't appear once. Not at the main tables, not near Ethan, not even tucked awkwardly beside Claire. My chest tightened. I wasn't forgotten. I had been Sandra Whitmore. It didn't appear once. Not at the main tables, not near Ethan, not even tucked awkwardly beside Claire. My chest tightened. I wasn't forgotten. I had been omitted, deliberately. Beautiful setup, isn't it? The voice came from my left. I turned to see a woman about my age dressed in a champagne-colored dress smiling politely. It is, I replied, forcing a small smile. Claire really knows how to put on an event, she added. Everything's so intentional. There was something in the way she said that word, intentional. Yes, I said slowly. It certainly is. She glanced at the tables, then back at me. I thought you were sitting up front, she said casually. With family. I let out a soft breath. So did I. Her smile faltered just slightly before she nodded and excused herself, leaving me alone again with the truth settling heavier in my chest. This wasn't a mistake. Claire hadn't simply forgotten to assign me a seat. She had decided I didn't deserve one. I spotted Ethan again, this time laughing at something one of the men had said. He looked relaxed, comfortable, like he belonged here, like this world had always been his. For a moment, I saw him as he used to be 10 years old, sitting at our kitchen table, struggling through math homework with a furrowed brow. He would look up at me frustrated and say, I can't do this, Mom. And I would sit beside him, patient, steady. Yes, you can, I'd say. We'll figure it out together. I wondered, standing there in that glittering room, when he had stopped looking at me like that. When he had decided he didn't need me to figure things out anymore. Or worse. When he had decided not to see me at all. Mrs. Whitmore. I turned surprised. A young server stood beside me holding a tray of champagne flutes. Yes. He gave a polite nod. Would you like something to drink? Thank you, I said, taking a glass. As I did, I noticed the faintest flicker of hesitation in his eyes. Not rudeness, not even pity, just awareness, as if he knew something I didn't. Dinner service will begin shortly, he added. Thank you. He lingered for half a second longer, then walked away. I watched him go, unease settling deeper in my stomach. Something about the way people were looking at me tonight. Not directly, never directly, but enough to feel it. Like I was already part of a story everyone else had heard, except me. A soft, clinking sound echoed through the room as Claire tapped her glass with a fork. "Everyone, if I could have your attention," she said, her voice warm and confident. The room quieted almost instantly. Claire stepped forward, positioning herself perfectly under the chandelier, the light catching just right in her hair. "Thank you all so much for being here tonight," she began. "This evening means more to me than I can possibly put into words." Her tone was flawless, practiced. She spoke about success, about building something meaningful, about partnership and vision. She thanked colleagues, friends, mentors. And then she spoke about family. "My husband, Ethan," she said, turning toward him with a radiant smile, "has been my rock through everything. We've built a life together that I'm incredibly proud of." Polite applause. I felt a flicker of warmth for him even then. But Claire continued. "And of course," she added lightly, "we all come from somewhere. Some of us are fortunate enough to grow into the kind of environments that prepare us for spaces like this." A few guests chuckled softly. I felt my fingers tighten around the stem of my glass. Others, she went on, her tone still light, take a little longer to adjust. More laughter. Not loud, not cruel, just enough. I stared at her. She didn't look at me. But I knew. I knew exactly who she was talking about. When the applause faded, the room shifted into motion again. Servers began moving more quickly, trays of food appearing from the kitchen. I watched as plates were set down in front of guests, beautifully arranged, steaming fragrant, filet mignon, roasted vegetables, something with a delicate sauce I couldn't quite name. The scent filled the air, and suddenly I realized how long it had been since I'd eaten. I hadn't had the heart to eat lunch. I had wanted to arrive feeling composed, ready, foolish really. "Excuse me," I said softly to a passing server. "Could you tell me where I'm seated?" He froze. "Just for a second." Then he gave a tight smile. "Let me check on that for you, ma'am." He disappeared quickly. Too quickly. I stood there, the noise of the room swelling around me again. Minutes passed. No one came back. Just for a second. Then he gave a tight smile. "Let me check on that for you, ma'am." He disappeared quickly. Too quickly. I stood there, the noise of the room swelling around me again. Minutes passed. No one came back. Then Claire appeared at my side. "Everything all right?" She asked, her tone sweet, but her eyes sharp. "I was just asking about my seat," I said calmly. She tilted her head slightly as if considering something trivial. "Oh," she said. "Right." There was a pause, just long enough to make it uncomfortable. "Well," she continued, lowering her voice slightly. There was a bit of a mix-up with the seat and G chart. "You know how these things are. Just long enough to make it uncomfortable." "Well," she continued, lowering her voice slightly. There was a bit of a mix-up with the seating chart. "You know how these things are?" No, I didn't, because I would never have allowed something like that to happen to someone I cared about. "But don't worry," she added quickly. "We've taken care of you. Taken care of me." Those words should have comforted me. They didn't. "Just stay right here," she said, placing a light hand on my arm. "Someone will bring your plate." And then she was gone again. I stood exactly where she had left me, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know where else to go. Around me, guests settled into their seats, laughter rising again as wine was poured and conversations resumed. At the main table, Ethan sat beside Claire. They looked perfect, like a photograph, like a life I had once believed I was part of. A few minutes later, a different server approached me. He didn't carry a tray like the others. He held something smaller, simpler. My breath caught as he stepped closer. "Mom," he said quietly, not quite meeting my eyes. "This is for you." And then he placed it in my hands. A white takeout box, warm but not fresh, light but heavy enough to tell me everything I needed to know. I stared down at it, my fingers tightening slightly around the edges. For a moment, I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't think. Then slowly, I lifted my eyes across the room to the table where my son sat. And even from that distance, I saw it. The way his gaze flickered toward me, the way it hesitated, and then the way he looked away. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a door closing. And somewhere behind me, from the direction of the kitchen, I felt a pair of eyes settle on me, watching, waiting, as if someone else in this room understood exactly what had just happened, even if my own family refused to see it. For a long moment, I simply stood there, holding that white box like it weighed far more than it should have. The sounds of the room didn't stop. No one gasped. No one intervened. Conversations continued. Forks touched plates, glasses clinked softly, as if nothing out of the ordinary had just happened. That, I think, was the worst part. Not the box, not even the insult, but the silence. I could feel the warmth of the food seeping faintly through the thin cardboard. But it wasn't the warmth of something prepared for me. It was the kind of warmth that lingers after something has already been served, already been enjoyed, already been chosen for someone else. I slowly lifted the lid. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I needed to see it with my own eyes to confirm that what I was feeling wasn't an exaggeration. Inside was a small portion of sliced meat, edges already cooling, a few vegetables tossed together without care, and a smear of sauce that had clearly been scraped from somewhere else. It wasn't a meal. It was an afterthought. My throat tightened, and I closed the lid, gently, careful not to make a sound. Don't cry. Not here. Not like this. I straightened my shoulders, lifting my chin just slightly, the way I had taught myself to do years ago when life demanded composure over comfort. If they wanted me to look small, I wouldn't give them that. I glanced again toward the main table. Ethan was laughing. Actually laughing. Claire leaned toward him, saying something that made him smile in that easy, relaxed way I hadn't seen directed at me in years. I searched his face for something. Guilt, discomfort, even a flicker of hesitation. There was nothing. Or maybe there had been, and he had chosen to bury it. Either way, the message was clear. He had seen, and he had allowed it. "Excuse me, Sandra." I turned to see Linda Foster approaching me, her expression tight with concern. Linda had known me for over 20 years. She had been there when Ethan graduated, when my husband passed, when life felt like it was splitting at the seams. She didn't miss things. Her eyes dropped briefly to the box in my hands. "Oh, Sandra," she said quietly. That was all, but it was enough. "You saw," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. She nodded, once her lips pressing into a thin line. "That wasn't an accident," she said under her breath. "No, it wasn't." I think I said carefully, "I've just realized that too." Linda glanced toward Claire, who was now moving gracefully from table to table, playing the perfect host. "She's been saying things," Linda added softly. "Nothing direct, but enough." "What kind of things?" Linda hesitated. "The kind that make people think you don't quite belong in spaces like this." A small, humorless smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. She didn't need to say much tonight. Linda reached out, touching my arm gently. "You don't have to stay," she said. I looked down at the box again. For a moment, the idea of leaving, just walking out, getting in my car, and pretending this night never happened felt like relief. But something inside me resisted, because leaving quietly, that would make it easy for them. It would make this whole thing disappear into polite silence, and I had spent too many years letting things disappear. "I'm not ready to go just yet," I said. Linda studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right," she said, "but you don't have to stand here alone." "I know," I replied. "Thank you." She gave my arm one last reassuring squeeze before stepping away, leaving me again at the edge of everything. A server passed by carrying a tray of fresh plates, the rich scent of butter and herbs trailing behind him. I watched as he delivered them to a nearby table, setting each one down with care, each guest receiving something that had been prepared specifically for them. I thought about all the dinners I had cooked over the years, all the meals where I made sure everyone else was fed first, where I adjusted recipes for preferences, allergies, tastes, where I stood in the kitchen long after everyone else had finished eating, cleaning up, quietly satisfied, just knowing they had been taken care of. I had never once given anyone leftovers like this. Not like this, not as a statement. "Ma'am." The voice came again, but this time it was different, lower, calmer. I turned slowly. A man stood just a few steps away, dressed in a crisp white chef's jacket. His sleeves were rolled neatly at the forearms, his posture relaxed but attentive. There was something about him, something steady, that immediately set him apart from the rest of the room. His eyes met mine directly, not scanning, not avoiding, seeing. "Yes," I said. He took a small step closer, his gaze dropping briefly to the box in my hands before returning to my face. "You shouldn't be eating that," he said quietly. The words weren't loud, but they cut through everything. For a second, I couldn't respond. Not because I didn't understand him, but because I did. Completely. "I beg your pardon." I managed, though my voice came out softer than I intended. He didn't flinch. "That wasn't meant for you," he said, at least not in the way it was given. There was no accusation in his tone, no judgment, just truth. And something else. Respect. It had been so long since someone had spoken to me like that, I almost didn't recognize the feeling. "I'm sure it's fine," I said automatically, the old reflex kicking in. "I don't want to cause any trouble." His expression shifted slightly, not frustration, but something close to disappointment. "Trouble isn't the problem here," he said. "Respect is." The word landed heavier than I expected. Respect. I tightened my grip on the box. "I don't think anyone meant—" "They did," he interrupted gently, not sharply, not rudely, just firmly. And for the first time that night, someone said out loud what everyone else had chosen to pretend wasn't happening. I looked at him more closely now. There was something familiar in the way he held himself. Not in his face exactly, but in the quiet confidence, the way he didn't shrink or perform for the room. "Do I know you?" I asked before I could stop myself. A small smile touched his lips. "Not personally," he said. "But I think I know you." My brow furrowed. "That's not something I hear often." He nodded slightly. "I imagine not," he replied. "But my mother used to talk about a woman named Sandra Whitmore." My breath caught. The room seemed to shift again, but this time it wasn't from humiliation. It was something else. Something deeper. "What did you say?" I whispered. He held my gaze steadily. "Cedar Grove," he added softly. "Does that mean anything to you?" And just like that, the past, the one I had carefully folded away and tucked into the quiet corners of my life, came rushing back. Cedar Grove. The name didn't just echo in my mind. It opened something. For a second, the room around me blurred. The chandeliers, the laughter, the polished voices, all of it faded into the background as something older, quieter, and far more personal rose to the surface. Yes, I said slowly, my voice barely above a whisper. It means something. The man in front of me, this chef, who somehow knew my name, watched me carefully, not pressing, not interrupting. That alone made me trust him more than anyone else in that room. I grew up there, I continued, a long time ago. He nodded as if confirming something he already suspected. My mother was Helen Reed, he said gently. The name hit me like a soft but undeniable wave. Helen! I hadn't heard that name spoken out loud in years. Helen worked at the library, he added. Small place. Everyone knew her. I let out a quiet breath, a faint, almost disbelieving smile touching my lips. Yes, I said. Everyone did. And just like that, I could see it again. The old brick building, the smell of paper and polish. Helen behind the front desk, always with a kind word. Always remembering names, always helping my sister find books she couldn't afford to buy. My sister, Emily. I felt my chest tighten again, but this time, it wasn't humiliation. It was memory. She used to talk about you, he said. I blinked, caught off guard. About me? He nodded. She said you were the kind of person who stood between the world and the people you loved, that you didn't step aside even when it would have been easier. I looked down at the box in my hands again. That sounds like someone I used to be, I said quietly. His gaze softened, but there was something steady in it. I think it still is, he replied. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The noise of the party continued behind us, but it felt distant now, like something happening in another life. What's your name? I asked. Gabriel, he said. Gabriel Reed. I nodded slowly. It's nice to meet you, Gabriel, I said, even if the circumstances are unusual. A faint smile crossed his face. I wish they were better, he admitted. So do I. He glanced briefly over my shoulder toward the main room, then back at me. You don't have to stay here, he said quietly. I let out a small, humorless breath. It seems like I'm not exactly expected to stay anywhere, I replied. His expression tightened just slightly. That's not what I meant, he said. I mean, you don't have to accept this. He nodded subtly toward the box. I followed his gaze. I've spent a long time accepting things, I said. It becomes a habit. Habits can be broken. The simplicity of that statement caught me off guard, not because it was profound, but because no one had said anything like that to me in a very long time. I looked at him more carefully now. There was no pity in his eyes, no curiosity, just respect, and maybe a quiet kind of anger, not for himself, but for me. Why do you care? I asked softly. It wasn't a challenge. It was a genuine question. He took a moment before answering. Because I've seen what happens when people pretend something like this is normal, he said, and because my mother taught me better than that. Something in my chest shifted again. Helen would have hated this. Not the event, not the elegance, but the cruelty disguised as refinement. She always said, Gabriel continued, you can tell who someone is by how they treat the person they don't need to impress. I let that sit for a moment, and then I nodded. She was right. A burst of laughter rose from the main table. I didn't turn this time. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what I would see. Instead, I focused on the man standing in front of me, the only person in that entire room who had chosen not to look away. What would you do? I asked him. He didn't answer right away, not because he didn't know, but because he understood the weight of the question. That depends, he said finally. on whether you want to leave quietly or leave honestly. I felt those words settle deep. Quietly or honestly? I had been leaving quietly my whole life, walking away from conversations that hurt, letting things go that shouldn't have been allowed, telling myself it wasn't worth the trouble, that peace mattered more than pride. But standing there, holding that box of leftovers in a room full of people who had watched and said nothing, peace didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like erasure. I don't think I know how to leave honestly, I admitted. Gabriel's gaze didn't waver. I think you do, he said. You've just been told not to. I let out a slow breath. He wasn't wrong. For a moment, I imagined walking back into that room, setting the box down on the table in front of Claire, looking Ethan in the eye, saying something, anything that made it clear I wasn't going to accept this. The thought made my heart race. Not from fear exactly, but from something close to it. Because once you stop accepting things, you can't go back. And I wasn't sure what would be left if I crossed that line. My family, my place in their lives. Was there even a place left to lose? Grandma! The voice was small, hesitant. I turned quickly. Sophie stood a few feet away, her hands clasped in front of her, her eyes flicking between me and Gabriel. Hi, sweetheart, I said, forcing a gentle smile. She stepped closer, her gaze dropping to the box in my hands. Is that your dinner? She asked. The question was innocent, but it cut deeper than anything Claire had done. I knelt down slowly, bringing myself to her level. It's something like that. Is that your dinner? She asked. The question was innocent, but it cut deeper than anything Claire had done. I knelt down slowly, bringing myself to her level. It's something like that, I said. She frowned slightly. But everyone else has plates, she said. I swallowed. Yes, I said softly. They do. She looked up at me, then really looked at me the way children do when they're trying to understand something that doesn't make sense. That's not fair, she said. The simplicity of it made my chest ache. No explanation, no justification, just truth. I reached out, brushing a curl away from her face. Sometimes I said carefully, people do things that aren't fair. She shook her head. You always say we're supposed to be kind, she said. I felt something in me crack, not break but shift like ice, starting to give way. I do say that, I replied. Then why isn't Mommy being kind to you? The question hung in the air. Heavy, unavoidable. For a moment, I didn't know how to answer. Not because I didn't have words, but because any answer I gave would change something. Maybe everything. I glanced up briefly, catching a glimpse of Claire across the room. Her back turned, still smiling, still perfect. And then I looked back at Sophie. At the one person in that entire room who saw me clearly. I think I said slowly that sometimes people forget how to be kind when they're too busy trying to be something else. Sophie considered that. Then she nodded as if it made sense in the simple, honest way children understand things. You're still kind, she said. My throat tightened. Thank you, I whispered. She leaned in and hugged me again tighter this time. And as I wrapped my arms around her, holding her close, I realized something I hadn't fully understood until that moment. I wasn't just standing there for myself anymore. I was standing there for her, for what she would learn about love, about respect, about what it means to accept or refuse being treated like you don't matter. And suddenly leaving quietly didn't feel like an option at all. I didn't stand up right away after Sophie hugged me. I stayed there for a second longer than I needed to. My arms wrapped around her small frame, breathing in the faint scent of her shampoo, something sweet and simple, something real. Not like the room around us. When she finally pulled back, she gave me a small, determined nod, as if we had just shared something important without fully saying it. "I'm going to sit with Mommy," she said. I hesitated. "Okay," I replied gently. She turned to go, then paused. "Don't forget what you told me," she added. I blinked. "What was that?" "That we're supposed to be kind," she said. And then she walked away. I watched her go, her little figure weaving through a sea of polished adults, and I realized something that settled deep into my bones. She wasn't just reminding me of kindness. She was reminding me of truth. I rose slowly to my feet, the box still in my hand. For the first time since I arrived, I didn't feel uncertain about where I was standing. I felt still. Not small, not invisible, just still. And that stillness gave me clarity. Gabriel hadn't moved far. He stood a few steps away watching me, not intrusively, not impatiently, but as if he understood that whatever came next had to come from me. "Well," he asked quietly. I exhaled. "I think I know how I'm leaving tonight," I said. He nodded once. "Honestly?" he asked. I met his gaze. "Yes." I turned toward the main room, toward the table where Claire sat, her posture perfect, her smile effortless, her world exactly the way she had arranged it, toward Ethan. "My son." My heart tightened for a moment, but it wasn't the same kind of ache as before. It wasn't desperate. It was clear. I began to walk. Each step felt heavier than it should have, but I didn't stop. Conversations quieted slightly as I moved through the room. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough for me to feel it. Eyes followed. People noticed. Of course they did. They had noticed before. They had just chosen not to act. When I reached the table, Claire looked up first. Her smile didn't falter. Not at first. "Sandra," she said brightly. "There you are. I was just about to come check on you. Of course she was." I set the white box down carefully on the table in front of her. Not aggressively, not dramatically, just deliberately. Her eyes flickered down to it, then back up to me. Something in her expression shifted. Only slightly. "What's this?" she asked lightly. I held her gaze. "I think you know exactly what it is," I said. The table fell quiet. Not completely. There were still sounds from the rest of the room, but here at this table, everything stilled. Ethan looked up now. Really looked at me. "Mom," he said, his voice low, warning. That word. Mom. It sounded different now. Not comforting, not grounding, just late. I asked for a seat. I continued calmly, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. I was told there was a mix-up. Claire let out a soft laugh. "Oh, Sandra, it's really not that serious." "And then I was given this," I said, gesturing toward the box. Her smile tightened. It was just a temporary solution. "The kitchen was—" "No," I interrupted. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "No, it wasn't." The silence deepened. Claire's eyes sharpened just a fraction. "You're making this into something it isn't," she said. Her tone still controlled, but cooler now. I shook my head slowly. "No," I replied. "I think I'm finally seeing it for what it is." I glanced briefly at the people seated around the table. Business partners, acquaintances, people who would forget this night the moment it no longer entertained them. And then I looked back at her. "You didn't forget to seat me," I said. "You chose not to." Her jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "What's not fair," I said quietly, "is standing in a room full of people and being treated like I don't belong in my own family." That landed. I saw it in the way a few guests shifted uncomfortably, in the way someone cleared their throat, in the way Claire's perfect composure began to crack just slightly. Ethan leaned forward. "Mom, can we not do this right now?" he said, his voice tense. "This isn't the time." I turned to him, and for the first time that night, I didn't soften. "When is the time, Ethan?" I asked. He opened his mouth, closed it. No answer. "Because I've been waiting for the right time for a long time," I continued, "and somehow it never seems to come." "Please," he said, his voice dropping. "You're making a scene." A scene. That word. I let out a small breath. "No," I said gently. "I'm responding to one." Claire leaned back slightly in her chair, crossing her arms. "If you're uncomfortable," she said, her tone now openly cool, "you're more than welcome to leave." There it was, not hidden, not dressed up, just said. I looked at her for a long moment. "I am going to leave," I said. Relief flickered across her face. Quick, controlled. "But there. But not because I'm uncomfortable," I added. Her expression hardened again. I reached down, picked up the box, and placed it gently back in her hands. "You can keep this," I said. A murmur moved through the table. "I don't take leftovers from people who think I am one." Silence. Complete, undeniable silence. Claire's fingers tightened around the box. Ethan stared at me, something like shock flickering across his face. I let the moment sit. Not to punish them, not to prove anything, just to let the truth exist in the open. Then I straightened. "I hope the rest of your evening goes exactly the way you planned it," I said calmly. And I meant it, because now I understood something I hadn't before. This night had gone exactly the way Claire had planned it. The difference was, I was no longer playing the role she had assigned me. I turned and walked away. No rush, no hesitation, just steady steps toward the exit. The room seemed different now, quieter. Or maybe I was just hearing it differently. I didn't look back. Not once. As I reached the doors, I saw Gabriel standing there exactly where I had left him. He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't need to. He had already seen enough. "Well," he said softly. I let out a long breath. "I left honestly," I replied. A small, genuine smile crossed his face. "Yes," he said, "you did." I glanced back once, not at the table, not at Claire or Ethan, but at the room itself. At the place where I had stood and realized I no longer belonged. And for the first time, it didn't hurt. Because I understood now, belonging isn't something other people get to take from you. It's something you stop giving away. "Are you heading home?" Gabriel asked. I hesitated. For just a moment. Then I looked at him. "Actually," I said, surprising myself, "I don't think I am." He raised an eyebrow slightly. "No," I shook my head. "Not yet." Because something had shifted tonight. Something I couldn't ignore. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't ready to go back to the life I had been quietly accepting. not without understanding what it was I had just walked away from, or what I might be walking toward. The night air felt different the moment I stepped outside. Cooler, quieter, honest. For a few seconds, I just stood there on the stone steps of the country club, letting the silence settle around me. Inside, behind those heavy glass doors, the party continued music, laughter, clinking glasses, all of it moving forward as if nothing had happened. As if I had never been there. And for the first time, I didn't feel erased by that. I felt free from it. "Do you need a ride?" Gabriel asked gently from beside me. I turned to him. He hadn't rushed ahead. He hadn't hovered. He had simply walked out with me, matching my pace without trying to lead it. "No," I said, then paused. "I drove." He nodded, hands slipping casually into the pockets of his jacket. "Good," he said. "That means you have options." I let out a small breath, something close to a laugh. "Options," I repeated. "I'm not sure I've thought of my life that way in a long time." "That might be part of the problem," he said quietly. I looked at him. He wasn't being cruel, just honest. And strangely enough, I didn't mind that. We walked slowly toward the parking lot, the soft glow of overhead lights stretching long shadows across the pavement. For a while, neither of us spoke. It wasn't uncomfortable, just thoughtful. "I meant what I said in there," I finally said. Gabriel glanced at me. "About leaving honestly?" I nodded. "Yes." "And," I exhaled slowly, "and now I have to live with what that means." He tilted his head slightly. "Do you regret it?" I didn't answer right away. I thought about Claire's face when I set the box down. About Ethan's expression caught somewhere between embarrassment and something he didn't quite name. About Sophie. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret it." "Then that's a good place to start." I smiled faintly. "Is it?" "Yes," he said, "because regret is what keeps people stuck." That landed deeper than I expected. We reached my car, and I rested my hand lightly on the door handle without opening it. For a moment, I just stood there again. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I wasn't sure I wanted to do what I had always done next. Go home, sit in silence, pretend things would somehow fix themselves. "I don't think I'm ready to go back yet," I admitted. Gabriel didn't seem surprised. "Back to the house?" he asked. "Back to that version of my life," I said. He nodded slowly. "That makes sense." I looked at him, studying his face more carefully now in the soft light. "You said your mother used to talk about me?" I said. "Yes. What did she say exactly?" "That makes sense." I looked at him, studying his face more carefully now in the soft light. "You said your mother used to talk about me," I said. "Yes." "What did she say exactly?" He hesitated, not because he didn't want to answer, but because he wanted to answer carefully. "She said you were the kind of person who carried more than your share," he said. "And that one day you might forget you had the right to put some of it down." My throat tightened. "That sounds like her," I said quietly. "She also said," he added, "that people like you don't break all at once. They just slowly start accepting less than they deserve." I looked away for a moment out across the dark parking lot. "I think I did that," I admitted. Gabriel didn't argue. "I think a lot of people do," he said. "Especially when it's family." I nodded, because that was the truth, wasn't it? It wasn't strangers who had taught me to accept less. It was love, or what I had believed was love. My phone buzzed suddenly in my purse. The sound felt louder than it should have in the quiet. I hesitated before pulling it out. Ethan, of course. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the answer button. Gabriel didn't look at the phone. He looked at me. "Do you want to take that?" he asked. I swallowed. "I don't know." "That's your answer then." I let out a small breath, and I let the phone ring. When it stopped, a message appeared almost immediately. "Mom, where are you? We need to talk." I stared at the words. We need to talk. Not, I'm sorry. Not, are you okay? Just we need to talk. I felt something inside me shift again. Not anger, not even hurt, just clarity. I slipped the phone back into my purse. "Not tonight," I said softly. Gabriel nodded. "Not tonight," he echoed. "So, what now?" he asked after a moment. I looked at my car again, at the familiar shape of it, the predictable next step. And then I looked back at him. I think I said slowly, "I need to understand something." "What's that?" "Why tonight felt different," I replied. "Why I didn't just swallow it like I usually do." Gabriel smiled slightly. "I think you already know the answer." "Maybe I said, but I'd like to say it out loud." He gestured lightly toward the street, "There's a diner about 5 minutes from here," he said. "Nothing fancy. Good coffee. Real food." I raised an eyebrow. "Real food sounds like a nice change." He chuckled softly. "Yes," he said. "It usually is." I hesitated, not because I didn't trust him, but because this moment felt like a turning point. Not dramatic, not loud, just important. "I don't usually do this," I admitted. "Do what?" "Get into a car with the man I just met and go somewhere else instead of going home," I said. He smiled, but there was no pressure in it. "Then don't do it for me," he said. "Do it for you." That was the difference. He wasn't offering an escape. He was offering a choice. And I realized something as I stood there, keys in hand, the night stretching out in front of me. For years, I had been making choices based on keeping the peace, maintaining appearances, avoiding conflict. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, I was making a choice based on myself. "All right," I said. Gabriel nodded once, as if that was all that needed to be said. "I'll follow you." For the first time in a long time, I was making a choice based on myself. "All right," I said. Gabriel nodded once, as if that was all that needed to be said. "I'll follow you," he added, "just in case you change your mind." I smiled faintly. "I don't think I will." As I got into my car and started the engine, I caught my reflection briefly in the rearview mirror. The same navy dress, the same face, but something was different. Not in how I looked, in how I held myself. There was no apology in my posture, no hesitation in my eyes, just presence. I pulled out of the parking lot, glancing once in the direction of the building. The lights still glowed. The music still played. Life inside still moved forward exactly as planned. But I was no longer part of that plan. And for the first time, that didn't feel like loss. It felt like beginning. The diner was exactly what Gabriel had promised. Nothing fancy. Fluorescent lights slightly too bright. Red vinyl booths with small cracks along the edges. The quiet hum of a refrigerator somewhere in the back. A waitress who didn't smile out of obligation, but out of habit. It smelled like coffee and something fried, comforting in a way that didn't ask anything from you. Real. We slid into a booth by the window. Outside, the road was mostly empty, a few cars passing now and then, their headlights sweeping across the glass like brief interruptions. I set my purse down beside me and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "You okay?" Gabriel asked. I nodded. "Yes," I said. "Actually, yes." And that surprised me, because I should have felt shaken, embarrassed, maybe even regretful. But I didn't. I felt awake. The waitress came over, poured coffee into 2 thick white mugs without asking, and gave us a quick nod. "You folks ready to order?" Gabriel glanced at me. I looked down at the menu, though I barely needed to. "I'll have the grilled chicken plate," I said, "and mashed potatoes. Comfort food." "Simple." "Good choice," she said, scribbling it down. "You," same Gabriel replied. She nodded again and walked off. No judgment, no assumptions, no subtle glances that tried to place me into some invisible category. Just service. Respect. It shouldn't have felt so rare. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug of coffee, letting the heat seep into my fingers. For a moment, neither of us spoke, but this silence felt different from the one at the party. This one wasn't heavy. It was spacious. So Gabriel said finally, leaning back slightly, "Cedar Grove." I smiled faintly. "You really know how to pick a conversation starter." He chuckled. "I figured we might as well start with something real." I nodded. "That was a long time ago," I said. "How long?" 35 years, I replied. "Maybe a little more." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "That's a lifetime." "It feels like 2, I said, "before and after." He didn't ask me what the dividing line was, but I knew. Emily. "My sister," I said quietly. "Emily." Gabriel's expression softened. "My mother mentioned her too," he said. "She said Emily loved books more than anything." I smiled, but it didn't quite reach my eyes. "She did," I said. "She had this way of getting lost in them, like the world couldn't touch her there." "What happened to her?" he asked gently. The question hung in the air. I stared down into my coffee for a moment, watching the faint ripple of steam rise and disappear. "She died," I said. Simple, direct. But nothing about it had ever been simple. "I'm sorry," he said. I nodded. "So was I replied. For a moment, I thought about leaving it there, about keeping the rest of it folded away the way I had for years. But something about this place, about this moment, made that feel unnecessary. "She was younger than me," I continued, "not by much, but enough that I always felt responsible for her." Gabriel listened without interrupting. "She was brilliant," I said, "but fragile. Not in a weak way, just sensitive. The kind of person who feels everything more deeply than they should." He nodded slowly. "I've known people like that. I tried to protect her," I said, "from everything, from disappointment, from people, from herself sometimes." I let out a small breath. "But you can't protect someone from life," I added. "Not completely." "What happened?" he asked again, softly. I closed my eyes for just a second. "An accident," I said. "At least, that's what everyone called it." But even as I said the words, something in my chest tightened, because I had never been entirely sure that was the whole truth. "She was trying to get us out," I continued. "Out of Cedar Grove, out of everything that made her feel small." I paused, and I told her to wait. I added quietly. Gabriel's brow furrowed slightly. "Why?" Because I thought I knew better, I said. Because I thought if she just held on a little longer, things would get easier. I swallowed. They didn't. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was respectful, like he understood that some stories don't need to be filled with words. The waitress returned with our food, setting the plates down in front of us. The smell hit me immediately warm, savory, inviting. I stared at the plate for a moment. Real food, prepared for me, not scraped together, not given as an afterthought. It was such a small thing, and yet it felt significant. Go ahead, Gabriel said, nodding toward my plate. I picked up my fork, hesitated for a second, then took a bite. It was simple, but it was good, and for reasons I couldn't fully explain, that almost made me emotional. You see? He said lightly. Better than leftovers. I let out a soft laugh. Yes, I said. Much better. We ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before I spoke again. I haven't thought about Emily like that in years, I admitted. Like what? Like she was still part of something that mattered, I said. Gabriel tilted his head. She is, he said. I shook my head slightly. No, I replied. She became a memory, something I kept tucked away because it hurt too much to look at directly. I paused, and maybe because I felt like I failed her. His expression sharpened slightly. You didn't fail her. I looked at him. You don't know that. He held my gaze. I know what my mother said, he replied, and she didn't describe someone who fails the people she loves. I let that sit, because part of me wanted to believe him, and part of me didn't know how. You said something earlier, I said, about people like me accepting less than they deserve. He nodded. I think that started back then. I continued, after Emily. How I took a slow breath. Because when you lose someone like that, you start thinking that maybe if you had been different, stronger, smarter, more careful, it wouldn't have happened. I looked down at my hands. And so you try to be that version of yourself, I said. The one who keeps everything together. The one who doesn't complain. The one who makes sure everyone else is okay. And so you try to be that version of yourself, I said. The one who keeps everything together. The one who doesn't complain. The one who makes sure everyone else is okay. Gabriel didn't interrupt. You become accommodating, I added, even when it costs you something. Even when it costs you everything, he said quietly. I met his eyes. Yes, I whispered. Even then, we finished our meals slowly, the conversation drifting between past and present, between things said and things understood. By the time the plates were cleared, something inside me felt lighter. Not fixed, not healed, but acknowledged. And that was more than I had allowed myself in a long time. So, what happens now? Gabriel asked, as the waitress refilled our coffee one last time. I leaned back slightly, thinking. Tomorrow? I said slowly. Ethan is going to call again. Probably. And Claire will expect me to apologize, I added. Gabriel raised an eyebrow. Will you? I looked at him. Then I shook my head. No, I said, and for the first time that answer didn't feel frightening. It felt right. The drive home was quieter than I expected, not because the world had gone silent, but because my thoughts had finally begun to arrange themselves into something I could actually hear. Streetlights passed overhead in steady intervals, each one briefly illuminating the inside of my car before fading again into darkness. It felt almost rhythmic, like something guiding me forward without demanding anything from me. For years, I had driven this same route countless times, back and forth between my house and Ethan's, between routine and obligation, between what was expected and what was never quite said. Tonight felt different Tonight, I wasn't returning from something. I was leaving it behind. I pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine, sitting there for a moment, with my hands still resting on the steering wheel. The house in front of me looked exactly the same as it always had. White siding, soft porch light glowing. The same small garden I had tended for years, even when I didn't feel like tending anything at all. It was familiar, safe, and suddenly, I wasn't sure if that was enough anymore. I stepped out of the car slowly, the cool night air brushing against my skin again, and walked toward the front door. Inside, everything was quiet. Of course it was. No one was waiting. No one had expected me back at any particular time. And for once, that didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like space. I set my purse down on the kitchen counter and slipped off my shoes, the soft thud echoing slightly in the stillness. The house smelled faintly of lavender, the candle I had lit earlier before I left, hoping to create a sense of calm when I returned. I almost smiled at that. Calm. I had thought calm meant avoiding conflict. Tonight had taught me something different. My phone buzzed again. I didn't even have to look to know who it was. Ethan. This time I picked it up, not to answer, just to read. "Where did you go? Claire is upset." This is not how tonight was supposed to go. I stared at the message for a long moment. Not how tonight was supposed to go. I let out a soft breath. Of course it wasn't, because tonight hadn't been about me and their plan. I had just disrupted it. Another message came through. "Mom, please, we need to talk tomorrow." I typed back slowly, deliberately. Yes, tomorrow. Then I set the phone down. No apology, no explanation, just a boundary. And that felt new. I moved through the house, turning off lights I had left on, straightening small things out of habit. But my mind wasn't on those tasks. It kept drifting back to something Gabriel had said. "You don't have to accept this." At the time, it had sounded simple, almost too simple. But now, standing in my own kitchen, I realized how complicated that idea actually was. Because accepting something doesn't just happen in one moment. It happens in layers, over time, quietly, and undoing it takes more than one night. I walked into the living room and sat down slowly on the couch, letting my body sink into the familiar cushions. Across from me, the bookshelf stood just as it always had, rows of novels, old photo albums, small keepsakes collected over decades. My gaze drifted to one of the frames on the middle shelf. Emily. It was an old photo, grainy, slightly faded at the edges. She was laughing in it, her head tilted back, sunlight catching in her hair. I hadn't moved that photo in years, hadn't even really looked at it, not like this. I reached forward and picked it up. "You always wanted more," I said softly, tracing the edge of the frame with my thumb. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't push the memory away. I let it come. Her voice, her dreams, the way she used to talk about leaving Cedar Grove, about finding something bigger, something brighter. "You said I was too careful," I whispered. And she had been right. I had been careful. So careful that I had started to confuse safety with silence, stability with shrinking, love with endurance. My chest tightened slightly, but it wasn't the sharp pain I used to feel when I thought about her. It was something softer, something closer to understanding. "I think I stayed small after you," I admitted quietly, because it felt like the only way to keep things from breaking again. I paused. But things broke anyway. The words hung there. Simple, true, and strangely freeing. Because If everything could break even when you did everything right, then maybe doing everything right wasn't the point. I set the photo back carefully and leaned back into the couch, staring up at the ceiling. The silence wrapped around me again, but it no longer felt empty. It felt full of thoughts, of questions, of possibilities I hadn't allowed myself to consider before. What did I actually want? Not what Ethan needed, not what Claire expected, not what the role of mother or mother-in-law demanded. Me. The question felt almost unfamiliar, and that realization alone told me how long I had gone without asking it. Another thought surfaced. Sophie, her small voice, that's not fair. I closed my eyes briefly. Children don't complicate things the way adults do. They don't dress cruelty up as misunderstanding. They don't call disrespect timing or pressure or a mistake. They see it, and they name it. I wondered what she had seen tonight. Not just the box, not just the moment, but the way I responded, the way I stood, the way I left. And suddenly, that mattered more to me than anything Claire or Ethan might say tomorrow. Because Sophie was still learning what love looked like, and tonight I had shown her something different. I sat there for a long time, the clock ticking softly in the background, my thoughts moving slower now, settling into something steadier. At some point, I realized I wasn't exhausted the way I should have been. Emotionally, yes, but not drained, not depleted. If anything, I felt like something inside me had been returned, something I hadn't even realized I had lost. My phone buzzed one last time. A new message, not from Ethan, from an unknown number. I frowned slightly and opened it. "This is Gabriel. Just wanted to make sure you got home all right." I stared at the message for a moment, a small, unexpected warmth spreading through my chest. No pressure, no expectations, just care. I typed back. I did. Thank you, and thank you for tonight. The reply came a minute later. You did the hard part. I just pointed at it. I smiled. Maybe that was true. But sometimes, pointing was exactly what someone needed. I set the phone aside and leaned back again, letting my eyes close. Tomorrow would come. Conversations would happen. Things would be said that couldn't be unsaid. But tonight was mine. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. The next morning didn't ease into itself gently. It arrived sharp, clear, unavoidable. I woke up earlier than usual before the sun had fully risen, the soft gray light filtering through my bedroom curtains. For a moment, I lay still, listening to the quiet of the house, trying to understand what I felt. There was no heaviness in my chest, no lingering shame, just anticipation. And that told me everything I needed to know. Today was going to change something. I made coffee the same way I always did, slow, deliberate, familiar. The routine steadied me, grounded me in something I understood. But even as I moved through it, I could feel the difference. I wasn't bracing myself. I wasn't rehearsing apologies. I wasn't preparing to smooth things over. I was preparing to stand still, and that felt new. My phone rang just as I poured my first cup. Ethan, right on time. I stared at the screen for a second, then answered. Hello? There was a pause on the other end. Mom, he said. Finally. Not good morning, not how are you. Just relief that I had picked up. I said we could talk today, I replied calmly. I didn't say when. He exhaled sharply. Look last night? No, I interrupted gently. We're not starting there. Silence. I could almost hear him recalibrating. What do you mean, he asked. I said, taking a slow sip of my coffee, we're not going to start this conversation by pretending Le Saint Night was just a misunderstanding. I could almost hear him recalibrating. What do you mean, he asked. I said, taking a slow sip of my coffee, we're not going to start this conversation by pretending last night was just a misunderstanding. Another pause, then carefully, it was a stressful event. Things got mishandled. I closed my eyes briefly. There it was. Minimizing, reframing. The same pattern I had accepted for years. I was given leftovers in a takeout box while everyone else sat down to a formal dinner. I said, "That's not mishandled. That's deliberate." His voice tightened. "You don't know that." "I do," I replied. "How?" "Because Claire told me. Because everyone saw. Because you saw." But I didn't say all of that. Instead, I said, "Because it happened." He let out a frustrated breath. "Mom, you're blowing this out of proportion." I felt something inside me settle into place. Not anger, not hurt, just certainty. "No," I said quietly. "I'm finally seeing it in proportion." There was a long silence on the line. When Ethan spoke again, his voice was lower. "Claire is really upset," he said. "She feels like you embarrassed her." I almost smiled. Of course she did. Did she feel that way when she handed me that box, I asked? "That's not the point. It is the point," I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "She's my wife," he said. "You have to understand that I have to support her." I leaned against the counter, staring out the window at the quiet street. "And I'm your mother," I replied. "Do you understand that?" He didn't answer, not right away. "I'm asking you a very simple question, Ethan," I continued. "Did you think what happened last night was acceptable?" Another pause, longer this time. "I think it could have been handled better," he said finally. I let out a slow breath. "That's not what I asked. I don't want to get into semantics," he said, irritation creeping into his tone. "It's not semantics," I said. "It's clarity." My grip tightened slightly around the mug. "Was it acceptable," I repeated, "for your mother to be treated that way in front of a room full of people?" Silence. Then, "No," he said, soft, reluctant, but real. I closed my eyes for just a second. "Thank you," I said, because that mattered, more than he probably realized, but he added quickly, "That doesn't mean you had to make a scene." There it was again. The shift, the deflection. "I didn't make a scene," I said calmly. I responded to one. "You walked up to the table. You said things people were staring. They were already staring." I interrupted. "You just didn't notice until I stopped pretending it was okay." He went quiet again. And this time, I could feel something else in the silence. Not just frustration. Uncertainty. "Mom," he said more slowly, "what do you want from me?" The question surprised me, because for years I had known exactly how to answer that. "I want you to include me. I want you to respect me. I want you to see me." But this time, the answer was different. "I want you to be honest," I said. "I am being honest." "No," I replied. "You're being careful." He exhaled. "What's the difference? Honesty doesn't protect anyone," I said. "It just tells the truth." "And you think I'm not telling the truth?" "I think you're trying to keep everyone comfortable," I said. even if that means ignoring what's right in front of you. Another long pause. Then quietly, "That's not fair." I let that sit, because fairness wasn't something he had worried about last night. "Neither was what happened to me," I said. There was a shift in his tone when he spoke again. Less defensive, more unsure. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. I thought about that for a moment, not the version of the answer I had given in the past, but the one that was true now. "I want you to decone that was true now. I want you to deck-eyed who you are," I said. He sounded confused. "What does that mean?" "It means," I replied, "you can't keep standing in the middle, Ethan. You can't keep pretending that neutrality is the same thing as fairness." "Eyed who you are," I said. He sounded confused. "What does that mean?" "It means," I replied, "you can't keep standing in the middle, Ethan. You can't keep pretending that neutrality is the same thing as fairness." "I'm not neutral," he said quickly. "You were last night," I said, and that hung between us. Heavy, undeniable. "I didn't know what to do," he admitted finally. There it was, the truth, simple, unpolished. "I believe that," I said, "and you're punishing me for it." "No," I replied, "I'm refusing to carry the weight of it." He went quiet again, and this time I let him, because this part he had to sit with. "I'm going to come by later," he said after a moment. "We should talk in person." I considered that, then I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "All right," I said. "We will." "Will Claire be there?" he asked cautiously. "No," I replied. A pause. "Why not?" "Because this conversation is between you and me," I said, "and it's long overdue." He didn't argue, and that told me something too. When I hung up, I set the phone down slowly and stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle again. But this silence was different from yesterday. It wasn't about avoidance, it was about space, for something new to take shape. I walked back into the living room, my eyes drifting once more to Emily's photo. "You always said I needed to stop being so careful," I murmured. And for the first time, I felt like I finally had. Not in a reckless way, not in a way that would destroy everything, but in a way that would finally allow something real to exist. Outside, the sun had fully risen now, light filling the room in a way it hadn't just an hour before. I stood there watching it for a moment, feeling something unfamiliar, but steady, settle inside me. Not fear, not hesitation, just a readiness. Because whatever came next, I stood there watching it for a moment, feeling something unfamiliar but steady settle inside me. Not fear, not hesitation, just readiness. Because whatever came next, I wasn't going to shrink to fit it. Ethan arrived earlier than I expected. Not mid-afternoon, not after he had time to compose himself or coordinate his words carefully with Claire. Late morning. That told me something before I even opened the door. He wasn't in control of this anymore. I opened it to find him standing there, hands in his coat pockets, shoulders slightly tense. He looked tired, not physically, emotionally. "Hi," he said. "Hi," I replied. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I stepped aside. "Come in." He walked into the house like he had 100 times before, but something about the way he moved felt different, less certain, less sure of his place. I closed the door behind him and gestured toward the living room. "Coffee?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, I'm okay." Of course he was. Ethan had always been the kind of person who said he was okay even when he wasn't. "Sit," I said. We took opposite sides of the couch, the same couch I had sat on the night before, holding Emily's photo. and trying to understand what had shifted inside me. Now the shift was here, in front of me. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped together. "I didn't sleep much," he admitted. I nodded. "I figured," he let out a breath. "Claire is furious," he said. There it was again. "Not Claire is sorry. Not Claire feels bad." "Furious? At me?" I asked. "At you," he said. "At me." At the situation I almost smiled. The situation I repeated. He rubbed his hands together like he was trying to calm himself. "Look, he said things got out of hand last night." "No," I replied calmly. "They got exposed." He looked up at me. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. The question wasn't sharp. It was confused, and that mattered. Doing what I asked. Pushing this so far, he said. It was one bad moment. We could have just talked about it. I held his gaze. "We are talking about it," I said. "You know what I mean," he replied, frustration creeping into his tone. "You didn't have to make it public." I let that sit for a second. Then I asked, "Was it public when it happened to me?" He blinked. "What? The moment itself," I clarified. "Was that private?" He didn't answer. "Or was it in a room full of people?" I continued. His jaw tightened. "That's different." "How?" I asked. He opened his mouth, closed it, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. He didn't have an answer. "I wasn't trying to humiliate you," he said finally. "I know," I replied. That caught him off guard. "You do?" "Yes," I said. "You weren't trying to do anything at all." The words landed harder than if I had accused him directly. "That's not fair," he said quietly. "No, I agreed. It isn't." Silence stretched between us. But it wasn't empty. It was revealing. "I didn't know how bad it looked," he said after a moment. I studied his face. "You didn't see me standing there?" I asked. "I saw you," he said quickly. "Did you see me?" I asked again. He frowned slightly. "What's the difference?" I leaned forward now, matching his posture. "The difference," I said, "is between noticing something and understanding it." He didn't speak. "You noticed," I continued, "but you didn't understand. Or you chose not to. That's not true." "Then tell me what you thought," I said. In that moment, he hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. I thought he started, then stopped. I waited. "I thought it would pass," he said finally, "that it wasn't worth making a bigger deal out of it." There it was. The truth. Simple, honest, and deeply disappointing. I sat back slowly. "And what if it had been Claire?" I asked. His head lifted quickly. "That's not the same." "Why not?" "Because." He stopped again, frustration showing in his face. "Because she's your wife?" I asked. He didn't answer. "Because she matters more," I added. "That's not what I'm saying." "But it's what you're doing," I said. He stood up suddenly, pacing a few steps across the room before turning back to me. "You're twisting this," he said. "You're making it into something it's not." I watched him carefully. "No," I said. "I'm refusing to keep it smaller than it is." He ran a hand through his hair. "You don't understand how much pressure Claire was under," he said. I tilted my head slightly. "And that justifies what she did." "No, but, and it justifies what you didn't do," I pressed. He stopped pacing, turned to face me. "No," he said again more firmly. We stood there looking at each other, and for the first time since he walked in, something shifted. Not in me, in him.
I didn't know what to do.
He admitted finally. There it was, the truth. Simple, unpolished. I believe that, I said, and you're punishing me for it. No, I replied. I'm refusing to carry the weight of it. He went quiet again. And this time, I let him. Because this part mattered. I messed up, he said quietly. The words settled into the room. Real. Unavoidable. I felt something in my chest soften slightly. Because that was all I had wanted. Yes, I said. You did, he nodded once. I didn't realize how bad it was, he added. I believe that I said again. That didn't excuse it, but it made it honest. He sat back down slowly, his posture different now, less defensive, more open. What do I do now? He asked. The question felt familiar, but also new. Do you want to fix it, I asked, or understand it? He frowned. What's the difference? Fixing it is about making it disappear, I said. Understanding it is about making sure it doesn't happen again. He leaned back, thinking. I want to understand, he said. I nodded. Then you have to stop protecting the version of events that makes you comfortable, I said, and start looking at the parts that don't. He exhaled slowly. That's not easy. I know, I said, but neither was last night. Silence again, but this one felt different, constructive. I think Claire knew what she was doing, he said suddenly. I didn't react outwardly. You do too, don't you? He asked. Yes, I said. He looked down at his hands. I don't know why she would do that, he admitted. I watched him carefully. Are you sure I asked? He looked up. What do you mean I didn't answer immediately? Because this was where everything shifted. Ethan, I said slowly, how much have you and Claire talked about my house? His expression changed, just slightly, but enough. And in that moment I knew. The leftovers, the humiliation, the silence. It hadn't just been about disrespect. It had been about something else. Something underneath. Something planned. And for the first time, I could see the shape of it clearly forming. Ethan didn't answer my question right away. He didn't deny it either. And that silence said more than any explanation he could have given me. I watched him carefully, not with anger, but with a kind of quiet attention I hadn't given him in years. The kind that sees beyond the words people choose and listens to what they avoid. How much, I asked again, my voice steady. He shifted slightly on the couch, his hands clasping and unclasping, as if he needed something to hold on to. We've talked about it, he said finally. That wasn't an answer. That's not what I asked, I replied. He let out a breath, rubbing the back of his neck. Claire thinks it would make sense for you to downsize, he said. That house is too big for you. It's a lot to manage. There it was, not the truth, but the version of it he had been given. I've lived in that house for 32 years, I said. I think I understand what it takes to manage it. I'm not saying you don't, he replied quickly. I'm just saying things change. Yes, I said. They do. I leaned forward slightly. And what exactly is supposed to change, Ethan? He hesitated again. Claire thinks it would be better for everyone if things were simplified, he said. Simplified. Another carefully chosen word. And what does simplified mean? I asked. It means fewer complications down the line, he said. Fewer things to worry about. For whom, I asked. He looked up at me. For all of us, he said. I held his gaze. No, I said quietly. Not for all of us. He frowned. What do you mean? I said that house is not a complication for me. It's my home. I paused, letting the next part land clearly. So, if it's a complication, it's not mine. The room went still again. Ethan shifted in his seat, something unsettled moving through him now. That's not how Claire sees it, he said. I'm not asking how Claire sees it, I replied. I'm asking how you see it. He opened his mouth, then stopped, because for the first time, he didn't have Claire's language to fall back on. He had to think. And thinking meant questioning. I think he started then, hesitated. I waited. I think it would be easier if everything was more. Because, for the first time, he didn't have Claire's language to fall back on. He had to think. And thinking meant questioning. I think. He started, then hesitated. I waited. I think it would be easier if everything was more organized, he said finally. I almost smiled. Organized, I repeated. He looked at me frustrated. You're picking apart everything I say. No, I said calmly. I'm asking you to be clear. I leaned back slightly. What does organized mean, Ethan? I asked. Selling the house, transferring ownership, moving me somewhere else. His silence answered that question too. You've talked about all of those things, haven't you? I said. He swallowed. Yes. The honesty was quiet, but it was there. And did you ever plan to talk to me about it? I asked. He shifted again. We were going to, he said. When? I pressed. Soon. I held his gaze. Before or after last night? That landed. Hard. He looked away first. That's not fair, he said. No, I replied softly. It isn't. Because suddenly, everything made sense. The way Claire had positioned me at that party. The way she had stripped me of dignity in front of people who mattered to her. The way Ethan had stayed silent. It hadn't just been cruelty. It had been strategy. A way to make me feel smaller, weaker, easier to move, easier to convince, easier to erase. I felt a cold clarity settle over me. Last night wasn't just about embarrassment, I said quietly. Ethan looked up. What? It was about power? I continued. About showing me where I stand. That's not true, he said quickly. Then explain it to me, I said. He couldn't, because the truth didn't sound good when spoken out loud. We weren't trying to hurt you, he said instead. I know, I replied. That surprised him again. You do? Yes, I said. You were trying to move me. His face went still, and there it was. The moment he realized I understood. You were trying to make me feel like I didn't belong, I said, so that I would step aside on my own. That's not he started then stopped, because even he couldn't finish that sentence. Not honestly. I didn't agree to that, I added. You're making it sound worse than it is, he said, his voice tightening again. No, I said. I'm finally seeing it clearly. Finally, he stood up again, pacing like before, but this time there was something more frantic in his movements. Claire just wants what's best for our future, he said. And where do I fit into that future? I asked. He didn't answer. You see, I continued, that's the problem. He turned to me, frustration rising. You're part of the family, he said. Am I? I asked. He froze. Yes, he said, but it sounded less certain now. Then why was I treated like I didn't belong? I asked. He didn't respond. Why was I given leftovers while everyone else had a place at the table? I pressed. That was a mistake, he said quickly. No, I said, it was a message. Silence again. You just didn't want to hear it, I added. He stared at me, something shifting in his expression. Not anger, not defense, something closer to recognition. I didn't think it was that serious, he said quietly. That's because you weren't the one holding the box, I replied. That landed. Deep. He sat back down slowly, his shoulders dropping slightly. I didn't realize, he began. I know, I said, and I meant it. He hadn't realized. Not fully. Because realizing would have required him to step outside of Claire's version of things. And he hadn't done that. Until now. What happens now? He asked again, his voice softer this time. I took a breath. Because this was the part that mattered most. Now, I said, we stop pretending this is about convenience. He looked at me. It's about control, I continued. About who gets to decide what happens to my life. He didn't argue. Claire has been deciding things for a long time, I said. And you've been letting her. That's not fair, he said again, but there was less force behind it now. No, I said. It's accurate. He leaned back, staring at the floor for a moment. I didn't see it that way, he admitted. I know, I said. But I do now, he added quietly. And that mattered, because seeing was the first step. But it wasn't the last. What are you going to do about it? I asked. He looked up at me. I don't know yet, he said. I nodded. That's honest, I replied. And for the first time in this conversation, I felt something shift in a different direction. Not resolution, not forgiveness, but movement. Real movement. Because for the first time, Ethan wasn't just reacting. He was thinking. And thinking meant the story wasn't finished yet. The knock came sooner than I expected. Not loud, not aggressive, just firm. I didn't need to check who it was. Claire. I stood still for a moment in the hallway, letting the sound settle into the quiet of the house. Ethan had left about an hour ago, quieter than when he arrived, carrying something with him that I knew would not sit easily. Now the other half of that truth had come to my door. I opened it. Claire stood there in a fitted cream coat, her posture straight, her expression composed. To anyone passing by, she would have looked exactly as she always did. Perfect, controlled, untouched. But I had seen behind that now. Good morning, Sandra, she said. Her tone was polite, measured, but colder than I had ever heard it. Claire, I replied. I didn't step aside immediately. That alone shifted something. We need to talk, she said. I held her gaze. I agree, I said. Then I stepped back. Come in. She walked into the house slowly, her eyes scanning the room in a way that didn't feel like admiration. It felt like evaluation. That confirmed it. This had never just been about family. It had always been about assets, about value, about ownership. She removed her gloves, carefully setting them on the side table, then turned to face me. I'll get straight to the point, she said. Of course she would. I'd appreciate that, I replied. She took a breath. What happened last night was unfortunate, she began. But it's important we don't let emotions distort what needs to happen next. I almost smiled. Emotions. Distort. As if humiliation had been an overreaction. What needs to happen next? I asked. Her eyes met mine directly. We need to finalize the decision about the house, she said. There it was. No more careful wording, no more soft framing, just the truth. And what decision is that? I asked calmly. That you sell it, she said, and transition into something more appropriate for your stage of life. Appropriate. I let that word sit between us. Appropriate for whom? I asked. For everyone, she said smoothly. For Ethan, for Sophie, and for you. No, I said. The word was simple, clear, and it landed harder than anything else I could have said. Her expression didn't change immediately, but I saw it, the slight tightening around her eyes, the shift. I don't think you understand, she said, her tone still controlled, but sharper now. This isn't just about preference. It's about planning. For what I asked. For the future, she replied. I nodded slowly. And in that future, I said, where exactly do I stand? She didn't hesitate. You would be taken care of, she said. Taken care of? The same tone she had used the night before. The same quiet dismissal dressed as kindness. I am already taking care of myself, I replied. That's not the point, she said. It is the point, I said. I stepped a little closer now, not aggressively but with intention. You're not offering help, I continued. You're asking for control. Her composure cracked just slightly. That's not true. Then explain it, I said. She straightened her voice, cooling further. That house is a liability, she said. It's inefficient. It's outdated. And frankly, it doesn't align with the direction our family is moving in. Our family. I let out a slow breath. And last night, I said, was that part of aligning me with your direction? She froze, just for a second. But it was enough. You're being dramatic, she said. No, I replied. I'm being precise. Silence filled the room, and for the first time, she didn't rush to fill it. Because she knew. She knew I understood. You wanted me to feel out of place, I said quietly. Small, unwelcome. That's not. So that I would step back. I continued, not raising my voice. So that I would stop questioning what you were planning. Her jaw tightened. You're interpreting things in a way that suits you, she said. No, I said. I'm seeing them the way they happened. Another silence, longer this time, heavier, and then she made a mistake, a small one, but enough. You've always been resistant to change, she said. This was just a way to make that clear. There it was, not an apology, not even a denial. A justification, a confirmation. I felt something settle inside me completely. Solid, unshakable. Thank you, I said. She blinked. For what? For being honest, I replied. Her expression shifted, uncertainty flickering for the first time. I didn't say anything. You did? I said. You just didn't mean to. I stepped back slightly, creating space between us again. And now, I understand, I added. Her eyes narrowed. Understand what? That last night wasn't a mistake, I said. It was a message. I paused, and now I'm sending one back. She straightened again, her composure snapping back into place like armor. And what message is that? She asked. I met her gaze steadily. That I'm not moving, I said. The words were simple, but final. Her lips pressed into a thin line. You don't have a choice forever, she said. I tilted my head slightly. Actually, I replied, I do. You're thinking emotionally, she said. This isn't sustainable. What's not sustainable, I said calmly, is pretending that my life is something you get to reorganize. Her patience was thinning now. I could see it. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said. "No," I replied. "I'm making it clear." Silence again. But this time, it felt different, decisive, because something had shifted fully. Not just in me, in the dynamic itself. She no longer held the upper ground she thought she did. "You're going to regret this," she said finally. I considered that. Maybe she believed it. Maybe she needed me to. "I've already regretted staying quiet," I said. "I'm not going to regret speaking now." Her eyes held mine for a long moment, and then she nodded once. A small, controlled motion. "Then we'll see how this plays out," she said. "Yes," I replied, "we will." She turned, picking up her gloves, slipping them back on with the same precision she had arrived with. And then she walked to the door. No apology, no softness, just calculation. But something about it felt different now, because I wasn't standing beneath it anymore. I opened the door for her. She stepped outside, pausing briefly before turning back. "This isn't over," she said. I nodded. "I know." She studied me for a second longer. Then she left. And as the door closed behind her, the house felt quiet again. But not empty, not uncertain, just mine. For the first time in a long time, there was no question about that. And whatever came next, I was ready for it. The house felt different after Claire left. Not quieter, not calmer, but clearer. Like something that had been sitting in the air for years had finally been named. And once it was named, it could no longer hide. I stood in the hallway for a while after the door closed, my hand resting lightly against the frame. Not because I was shaken, but because I was steady. And that steadiness was unfamiliar. It wasn't the kind that comes from everything being okay. It was the kind that comes from finally seeing things as they are. The next few days moved slowly, deliberately. Ethan called again that evening, and this time his voice was quieter, less defensive, less certain. "I talked to Claire," he said. "I expected you would," I replied. There was a pause. "She told me what she said to you," he added. I waited. "And?" I asked. "She didn't." I waited, and I asked. "She didn't think it was wrong," he admitted. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "That's consistent," I said. He exhaled. "I don't know what to do with that," he said. "That is not something you solve in one conversation. Think it was wrong," he admitted. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "That's consistent," I said. He exhaled. "I don't know what to do with that," he said. "That's not something you solve in one conversation," I replied. "That's something you decide how to live with." Another silence. "I don't think I can just ignore it," he said. "That would be new?" I said gently. He let out a small breath, something like quiet acknowledgement. "Yes," he said. Over the next week, things began to shift in ways I hadn't expected. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to feel. Ethan stopped talking about the house. Not completely, but the urgency was gone, the pressure, the assumption that it was already decided. And that told me something important. He was thinking, really thinking, for the first time in a long time. Claire, on the other hand, did not call. She did not visit again. She did not soften. But she did something else. She withdrew. And that silence carried its own message. Because people like Claire do not retreat unless something has changed beneath them. And something had. Not in her, in me. and in Ethan. A few days later, Ethan came by again. This time, he brought Sophie. The moment she stepped through the door, everything shifted. "Grandma?" she called, running straight into my arms. I knelt down and hugged her tightly, feeling that same warmth from the night at the party, but stronger now. Because this time, there was no room full of people watching. No performance. Just us. "I missed you," she said. "I missed you too," I replied. She pulled back slightly, studying my face in that careful way she had. "Are you okay?" she asked. I smiled. "Yes," I said. "I am," and for the first time, that answer felt completely true. Ethan stood in the doorway for a moment watching us. Not distracted, not distant, present. That more than anything told me something had changed. "Can I talk to you?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Of course." Sophie wandered into the living room, immediately drawn to the bookshelf, to the same place where Emily's photo still sat. I followed Ethan into the kitchen. He leaned against the counter, his posture less rigid than before. "I've been thinking," he said. I waited. "A lot," he added. "That's good," I said. He nodded. I didn't realize how much I was just going along with things, he admitted. "With Claire?" I asked. With everything he said. That mattered, because this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about him.
I think I got used to avoiding conflict,
He continued.
to keeping things smooth, even if that meant not looking too closely.
I leaned against the opposite counter.
That's a common habit, I said. It's not a good one, he replied.
I almost smiled. "No," I said.
It isn't?
He took a breath.
I told Claire I'm not comfortable moving forward with the house, he said.
I held his gaze. And I asked.
She didn't take it well, he said. I imagine not. She thinks I'm choosing you over her.
He added. I let that sit for a moment.
Are you?
I asked. He hesitated.
I'm choosing what's right,
he said finally. That wasn't a perfect answer, but it was an honest one, and right now, that was enough. "What happens now?" I asked. He shook his head slightly.
I don't know, he admitted.
We're not in a good place. I nodded. "I'm sorry," I said. He looked up quickly.
For what?
"For the part this plays in your marriage," I replied. He shook his head.
No, he said. This was already there. I just wasn't looking at it.
That was true, and hearing him say it out loud meant something. From the living room, Sophie's voice floated in. "Grandma?" "Who's this?" I stepped out to see her holding the photo of Emily. I walked over slowly. "That's my sister," I said. "She looks happy," Sophie said. "She was," I replied. Sophie tilted her head slightly. "Where is she now?" I knelt beside her. "She's not here anymore," I said gently, "but she's still part of our story." Sophie nodded, accepting that in the way children do. "She looks like you," she added. I smiled softly. "I'll take that as a compliment." Ethan stood in the doorway watching us again. But this time, there was something different in his eyes. Not distance, not avoidance, awareness, and maybe regret. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. I looked at him. For what I asked. For not seeing it sooner, he replied. I nodded. "That matters," I said. He stepped a little closer.
"I don't expect you to just forgive everything,"
he added. "I'm not ready to do that," I said honestly.
"I understand,"
he said.
And I believed him.
We stood there for a moment, the three of us, in a space that felt fragile but real. Not perfect, not resolved, but honest. And that was something we hadn't had in a long time. Later that afternoon, after they left, I sat by the window watching the light shift across the yard. The house felt full, not because of noise, but because of presence. Mine. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for permission to exist in it. I simply did. And that changed everything. Because healing does not come from someone else fixing what was broken. It comes from deciding you are no longer willing to live as if you are. And for the first time, I wasn't. A month later, I set the table myself. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. The late afternoon light filtered through the windows, casting soft gold across the dining room. The same dining room that had once felt too quiet, too large, too empty, now felt different. Lived in. Intentional. Mine. I placed the last plate down carefully, adjusting it just slightly until it felt right. Not perfect, just right. There was a difference. The sound of the front door opening reached me a moment later. Grandma Sophie's voice called. "In here?" I answered. She came running into the room, her energy filling the space before anything else could. "Wow," she said, looking at the table. "You made all this?" "I did?" I smiled. Ethan followed more slowly behind her, his steps quieter than they used to be. Not hesitant, but more aware. "Smells good," he said. "Thank you," I replied. He looked around the room, taking it in, and for a moment, I could see it in his expression. He saw the house differently now. Not as something to manage, not as something to restructure, but as something that held meaning. That mattered. "Can I help?" he asked. That was new. I studied him for a second, then nodded. "Yes," I said. "You can pour the drinks." He moved toward the kitchen without another word, and I turned back to Sophie, who had already climbed into her chair. "Are we celebrating something?" she asked. I smiled. "Yes," I said. "We are." "What?" I paused for just a moment. "Us," I said. She grinned. "I like that." A few minutes later, we were all seated. 3 generations at the same table. No performance, no audience, just presence. Ethan poured the last glass and sat down, glancing at me before speaking. "I talked to Claire," he said. I nodded. "I assumed you would." He took a breath. "We're taking some time apart," he said. The words were careful, but honest. I didn't react immediately, not because I didn't feel anything, but because I understood what that meant, not just for him, for all of us. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. He shook his head. "No," he replied. "This needed to happen." I held his gaze. "Are you sure I asked?" He nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "I didn't see it before. Not fully, but I do now." I let that sit, because seeing is not the same as changing, but it is where change begins. "She still thinks she was right," he added. "I know," I said. "And she thinks you're being difficult," he continued. I smiled faintly. "That's not new." Sophie looked between us. "Why would anyone think Grandma is difficult?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. I didn't. "Sometimes," I said gently, "when you stop letting people decide things for you, they don't like it." Sophie considered that. "That doesn't sound fair," she said. No, I replied. It doesn't. Dinner moved easily after that. Simple conversation, small laughter, moments that didn't need to be forced. And somewhere between passing dishes and refilling glasses, I realized something. This was what I had been trying to hold on to all those years. Not control, not perfection, just connection, real connection. And it had never come from shrinking myself to fit someone else's idea of what I should be. It came from standing where I was, fully. Honestly, after we finished eating, Sophie helped me clear the table. I like it better here, she said quietly as she carried a plate. Better than what I asked. Better than the party, she said. I smiled. Me too. She looked up at me. You looked sad that night, she said. I paused. I admitted, but not anymore, she added. I met her eyes. No, I said, not anymore. She nodded, satisfied, and carried the plate into the kitchen. Children have a way of knowing when something is true, even when they don't fully understand why. Later, after Sophie had settled into the living room with a book, Ethan lingered in the doorway of the kitchen. I know things aren't fixed, he said. They're not. I agreed. But they're different, he added. Yes, I said. They are. He nodded slowly. I don't expect things to go back to how they were, he said. Good, I replied. He looked at me surprised. I don't want them to, I added, because going back would mean losing everything I had just found. My voice, my place, myself. I want us to move forward, I said, but differently. He nodded. I understand, and this time I believed him. Not because he said the right thing, but because he was learning how to see. After they left that evening, the house grew quiet again. But it wasn't the same quiet as before. It wasn't empty. It wasn't waiting. It was full of choices, of boundaries, of a life that finally felt like it belonged to me. I walked back into the dining room, looking at the table one last time before turning off the light. And I thought about that night. The box. The silence. The moment everything shifted. It hadn't been the end of something. It had been the beginning. Because sometimes it takes being treated like you don't belong. To realize you've been sitting at the wrong table all along, and that you have every right to stand up and choose a different one. After everything that happened, I realized something I wish I had understood much earlier in life. Respect is not something you earn by staying quiet. It is something you protect by knowing when to speak. For years, I believed that keeping the peace meant being a good mother. I thought love meant endurance. I thought if I just gave a little more, stayed a little softer, accepted a little less, everything would somehow stay together. But what I didn't see was this. Every time I accepted less than I deserved, I was teaching people how to treat me. And the hardest truth of all, sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who forget our worth first. Not because they are evil, but because they get comfortable. Because they assume we will always stay. But staying should never mean shrinking. If you've ever been in a room where you felt invisible, if you've ever been treated like you were less than in your own family, if you've ever stayed silent just to keep things from breaking, I want you to know this. You are not wrong for wanting respect. You are not difficult for setting boundaries, and you are never too late to reclaim your place in your own life. So, I want to ask you something. What would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed at that table or walked away? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and your stories matter more than you think. And if this story spoke to you, if it reminded you of something you've been carrying quietly, Please take a moment to like and subscribe. It helps me share more stories like this, stories about strength, dignity, and starting over at any age. Also, I'd really love to know, where are you watching from today and what time is it there? You're not alone in this.